In Brenham, Texas, a young boy named Ricky who wears leg braces is training for baseball using a stick and stones. His dad watches him from behind. He hits one of the stones and looks backward to see if his dad saw it, but his dad just goes inside. One of his friends, Gracie, comes to tell him he's cheating because of how far he's hitting the stone, but he tells her he's not, and he thinks he is lucky enough to play in the majors one day.
Majors? Boy, you never gonna play one inning in the majors?
Never say never.
She thinks he's crazy, but he hits one of the stones again.
Still think I'm cheating?
See you later, alligator.
On Sunday, James, who happens to be the pastor, preaches a mighty sermon. While he preaches, Gracie's father, Earl, lights up a cigarette and smokes. Meanwhile, another member named Mrs. Babbitt continually spits tobacco on the floor. James humbly asks Earl and Babbitt to stop their activities while on the church premises. When Earl becomes defensive, James stands on his point and tells him he must keep the house of God pure. Meanwhile, the kids reach a field and Ricky stops midway when he sees a cool stick on the ground. He hands Robert a stone and tells him to throw it at him, while Connie does the job of a commentator. Ricky pictures himself playing in the major league.
Koufax warms his arm here at the Yankee Stadium. Tie game, bottom of the ninth. At bat, Rickey Hill. Koufax throws a surprise slider. Hill swings, swats a long fly ball. Might be, could be, it is Hill's third moonshot tonight.
Once he spots the stone, Ricky hits it precisely, and it goes flying across a far distance. They rejoice until they hear the rock hit some sort of glass. As the kids escape, Ricky, who had learned from his father to always take responsibility for what he does, decides to walk toward the place the stone reached. They meet a man named Ray, whose car windshield has just been cracked. Ricky tells him he'll get a job and pay for the damage, but the man is more impressed that he could hit a stone over 100 feet just using a small stick. The man tells him he's a prodigy and prays his leg heals so he can play professionally.
You know what a prodigy is? When you get them legs healed up, I'm gonna be the first guy at the gate to buy a ticket.
He asks Ricky to go back and hit the stone again, and he soon witnesses another stone crack on his windshield. That night, Helen's mother starts to talk about how he's hell-bent on biting the hands that barely feed him and his family. When she mentions that his so-called devotion to God has gotten Ricky malnourished, the table goes silent. Later that night, Robert and Ricky check out baseball cards during their evening Bible reading, and James comes in to warn them. He corrects Robert, who eventually says he got the cards because Ricky loves baseball. James tells Ricky that he knows he's always practicing, even when he's in pain, but
you can't play baseball. You can't even run. And if you try, you're going to get ridiculed, you're going to get made fun of.
Ricky eventually agrees, but he waits for James to leave and continues to stare at the baseball card while quoting the scripture from Isaiah.
Those that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall run and not be weary.
On Sunday morning, the family drives to church to find all the congregants standing outside, as if to gang up against them. Before James can step down, Earl tells him the flock doesn't want him anymore, and he has to leave.
Be quick! We need that house back!
But we just got here.
And we just kicked you out.
James takes the way of peace and tells them they'll be gone the next morning since they don't stay where they're not wanted. Helen, who is now angry, steps out of the car.
Yeah, shoot.
My husband, you run him out of his own church? Put his kids on the street because your pastor asked you to behave like the God-fearing people he believed you were?
Helen,
we're gonna be fine.
Am I ever gonna see my only ever boyfriend again?
I don't know.
The next morning, as they all leave town with their things packed, James notices Earl trying to drive while being drunk. Out of compassion, he stops him from driving so he doesn't kill himself. Earl doesn't care about his compassion. When Ricky shouts at Earl for being inconsiderate, Earl tries to beat Ricky.
Don't you touch my boy.
James manages to get Earl into his house, and he notices that Earl's wife has bruises on her face.
Thank you, Pastor.
On the road, James hears a noise from the car and realizes they're out of gas. When the car stops in the middle of nowhere, James, who has become pretty fed up, silently goes behind the trunk and kneels on the road and begs the Lord for a sign. For the first time in many years, James slightly curses as he hungrily kicks the car. Ricky rushes to hold his hands and asks if he's okay.
Just tired, son.
And Helen tells him it's all right and proposes they change the tire. James tells them that he sold the spare tire for some gas, and after a moment of silence, Grandma tells him he did the right thing.
Time's come.
Don't matter how well you mean or how hard you try. It don't work.
Well, it can't get much worse than this, huh?
James mentions that they're probably the unluckiest family in Texas.
Probably Oklahoma, too.
The entire family starts to laugh uncontrollably as they try to hide from the rain. Hours later, an elderly woman in a posh car stops and asks if they need help. James tells them they do, so she picks them up and takes them to her big mansion. Moments later, the kids are seated in front of a colored television, which startles them since it's their first time seeing one. In the living room, the elderly woman's husband, who happens to be a Christian, has a hospitable chat with the family. He tells them of a job he knows of. He mentions that his brother Dennis in Bowie City has been looking for a pastor, but there have been no takers because people feel the place is a bit local.
Suppose it ain't for you, but
We'll take it. Yes, we will.
It was not by accident that you found us on the road.
When the good Lord shuts a door, he opens a window.
The next morning, the family head over to Bowie City and are taken to their new home. The home looks so ragged that no one steps out of the car except James. When their host, Dennis, suggests they see the church because they'd love it, James opts for that instead. At the church, they find another old building with peeling paints and several cigarettes on the ground. Dennis thinks it's a fine place, but James reluctantly tells him he thinks it has possibilities. Later on, Ricky and Robert walk around the town. They run into some kids playing baseball, and Ricky asks the kids if they've got space for two more. The catcher, Jason, retorts that Ricky can't play since he has all those contraptions on his leg. One of the older kids, Quinn, makes fun of him.
I ain't playing with no robot boy.
When Robert tells them he won't play if they won't let Ricky play.
Come on. Hey, flamethrower. I hit off you. We both play.
In the first strike, Ricky hits the ball late and positions for another toss. In the second toss, he misses entirely because he can't twist well and falls on his bottom. Robert tells him they should leave, but Ricky refuses. He uses the baseball bat to hit his braces so he can rotate better, even though it hurts him. At the third strike, Ricky hits the ball far into the field, and that impresses the kids. Quinn, who had claimed Ricky can't hit his pass, tells them he still won't play with a robot boy, and Robert calls him out for lying to them. When Quinn gets physical with Robert, Robert doesn't fight back, and Jason reminds Quinn that the coach will throw him out of the team if he fights again. Sometime later, James joins the family for dinner and notices everyone is smiling at him. He asks them what's gotten them so happy, and Ricky stands in front of him without his braces. James is so happy.
Keep that ice cream man busy and I'm gonna steal us a gallon.
Oh, no, you won't.
Oh, yes, I will.
The next day, the boys join the neighborhood kids to sign up for the baseball team. The coach outlines his rules and tells them he expects devotion and commitment from them. He hands all the boys a consent form to hand to their parents. When the coach sees Ricky's legs,
We're making sacrifices.
Well spoke.
he respects his devotion despite his situation.
I'll give you through tryouts. Hey, but you better bring me some magic.
At night, Ricky approaches James with the form, and James tries to calm him down and tells him to recite Psalm 23.
Daddy, I know what you're gonna say, but I'm better.
You are not healed. Your bones are like twigs. You will not play. Ever.
He tells Ricky to see his health as a sign that the good Lord wants him to do something more important, but Ricky runs out of the room, which makes James worried. On Sunday, he notices another man smoking a cigarette during the sermon, but he doesn't stop him, even though the thought keeps distracting him. After service, Helen hands Ricky a letter from Gracie, and he quickly hides it. Later that day, the kids gather 75 cents to buy their dad a burger.
Cost 75 cents, and that's what I got.
They notice they're down a quarter, and the nice waitress hands them a quarter so they can buy it. At home, the entire family surprises James with the food. The kids tell him they recognize that he takes care of them all year, and they wanted to take care of him today. That night, Ricky hides under his covers to read the letter from Gracie, who tells him she and her family are moving.
Truly, I hope you're still swinging no matter how your legs are. Knowing you, I bet you a buffalo nickel you're still dreaming of the majors.
The next morning, Ricky and Robert stand outside the field and watch the other kids play. Jason tells them the coach isn't checking the signatures and tells them to forge it, because the real sin is not letting them play. Robert believes Ricky deserves to play, so he forges the signature, hoping the good Lord shares his perspective.
Evening, ma'am. Don Fisher, youth baseball coach. He signed Ricky's permission slip.
When James says he didn't sign any paper, the coach chuckles that boys can be like that and tells James about how he's never seen a kid play so well as Ricky.
the Lord give him a gift. You ain't gonna let him play?
Nope. Well, he's not gonna be playing.
Look, I've pastored 13 years up in the Panhandle, and I know good and well what a miracle looks like. And Rickey is one. So my counsel to you, Pastor, is figure out why you're so hell-bent on crushing the boy's soul and squandering his blessing.
When the coach leaves, Rickey tries to take the blame for the papers, but Roberts confesses that he signed it. Helen's mom stops him from picking on the boy and tells him he's turned his family into sheep and is sucking the joy out of them. Rickey repeats one of James's sermons to him about how a man must use his gifts to serve God.
Born to be a preacher.
It ain't about me swinging a stick to hit a stone. When I swing that bat, I ain't crippled no more. I am David taking down Goliath. Everybody can see how much this means to me but you, Daddy.
Don't you backtalk me, boy.
Robert, who knows he's going to be punished, starts to cry and James tells him to go out back.
You deceived me. This is about saving your soul.
You could beat me all night, but I could have changed Rickey.
He's lost.
He ain't the one who's lost.
As James is about to strike him with the belt, he can't bring himself to do it, so he tells Robert to go inside, and he starts to cry. Sometime later, Rickey goes to speak to his dad in the church and tells him he believes God has given him 2 gifts, so he's going to commit himself to preach the gospel with his mouth and play powerfully with his hands.
Now batting for the Buffaloes, center fielder, number 17, Rickey Hill.
Years later, Rickey, who is now the senior sensation of the Buffaloes teams and is able to walk well, wins the 1973 season opening with another game-winning home run. The man who had let Rickey hit his windshield years ago, Ray, happens to be present to support his career. After the game, they hear a familiar voice.
Sure he ain't cheating?
Girls don't know spit about baseball. Gracie?
Connie drags Robert away with the excuse that they want to go fix something. While Gracie and Rickey talk, it's obvious there is some chemistry between them.
Baby, is it always this hot?
Ned, this is my friend, Rickey.
Gracie tells him Ned is a sports writer and she thought they should meet. Helen invites them to dinner, and they all have a chat. James soon shows up to greet Gracie. When James invites Gracie to Sunday service, Ned asks if they don't play games on Sundays, and James tells him Rickey's father failed to lead him to a higher calling. With an uncomfortable chuckle, Ned tells James that he must have realized that Rickey is a phenom, watching him play, but James tells him he's never seen Rickey play. The next day, Gracie and Rickey go for a walk. When Rickey asks about Ned, Gracie tells him she broke up with him because of how rude he can be, and he fired her from her job as an editor. He tells her he kept all the letters she sent him, and she makes fun of him, but tells him she kept the 2 letters he wrote to her too. He asked her why she stopped writing to him.
Your career was taking off, and I figured you forgot about me.
While they talk, Rickey winces due to pain, and she asks him why he's in agony. He tells her his back is always sore from playing, but he can't tell the doctors because they'll tell him to stop playing. Days later, Ray tells Robert and Rickey that he's soon going to graduate from high school, and it's the season that scouts come looking for potential.
And right now is when all the scouts are snatching up all the good ones, and son, you're better than good.
He tells them he's going to call one of the best scouts he knows to come to see Rickey's game tomorrow so he can have a chance at playing in the majors. At the game, years later, Quinn still retains his grudge and promises to eliminate Rickey. Meanwhile, the scout Ray had called is seated in the crowd, watching closely to see how Rickey plays.
Scouting report said that kid's bat speed's off the chart. Didn't say nothing about that arm.
Despite Quinn's attempt to soil Rickey's gameplay, Rickey hits the first one and scores a point for his team. In the second game, as Rickey attempts to catch the ball, he trips over a sprinkler head and twists his ankles terribly.
Rickey?
Don't move.
I can finish.
Rickey is unable to continue due to the injury, and the scouts soon take their leave. At the hospital, the doctor tells James and Helen that it may be a miracle if Rickey is able to walk again. He tells them he plans to save his ankle, and the best he can promise is severe recovery after several surgeries which can cost about $7,000. At home, James tells Rickey his heart breaks for him, and Rickey asks him if he's going to tell him that this is also all part of God's plan to make him a pitiful cripple. James tells him not to talk about himself like that, but to realize that this gives him a chance to forget about baseball and know what he wants to do with the rest of his life.
First time you ever talked to me like a real old man is to say forget the only thing you ever cared for.
Gracie and Rickey sit on the car and have a chat. She promises that they'll find a way to raise the $7,000, but Rickey just gives sarcastic replies, as it seems his spirit is broken. He asks her why she came back, and she tells him she had been through a lot, but remembering him gave her hope. He asks her to let him be her first and last boyfriend, and she tells him he's going to have to try better if that's his proposal. At church, James runs a donation to raise some money for Rickey's surgery, and the congregants are happy to donate. Meanwhile, Gracie also runs another donation for Rickey's surgery. Days later, Ray comes to Rickey's home and announces that the big scouts are coming for tryouts in 2 months, and Rickey may have to recover quickly.
It's over. We didn't raise the money.
Ray writes a check to Rickey for the remaining amount.
Ray, I can't take it.
Who's giving it? It's a loan.
James, who doesn't like Ray too much, tells Ray he's going to cripple Rickey and asks him to leave because they don't need his money.
He's my son, not yours. I don't need you coming around here filling him full of false hope and putting him into debt.
Lillian, who seems to be sick and tired of James, accepts the check, and the family agrees, which makes James walk away. After the surgery, the doctors tell him he'll not be able to recover in time for the tryouts in 7 weeks because the damage is worse than they expected.
Tryouts are in 7 weeks.
Not for you.
One night, Rickey finds James, who had fallen asleep while reading a book on medical symposia, to learn better about Rickey's injury. After a movie date with Gracie, Rickey tells her he doesn't think he can go further because he's afraid he's going to paralyze himself and ruin their future. She tells him he can't give up, and she needs her dreamer again. When he refuses, Gracie walks away dejected. As Rickey walks away, Robert hurriedly comes to pick him up, and he gets home to see that Grandma is dying and doesn't have long to live. Rickey starts to cry, and he tells her the doctors are overreacting, but she calmly tells him she's going to meet her Lord. She tells them a story about how she once left her dreams at a young age to follow a man. She's glad she did that because she got them all from that decision, but she tells him that the pain of regret still stings her. Lillian looks at James and tells him he's a good man, but she asks him to be a great man.
James, give your son his dream.
So James honors her wishes. A few days later, the entire family gathers for Grandma's burial. James gives a speech that honors her love and her ability to say the truth even when you feel you didn't want to hear it. Over the next few weeks, Rickey removes his casts and starts to train with Robert. One day while practicing, Ray comes to tell them that the King of Scouts, named Red, is going to be there. Ray tells Rickey to be his best, but he trusts that all Red needs to do is to see him hit and he'll have a chance. On the night before the tryout, Rickey goes to the church to pray. He tells the Lord he's not doing this because he wants to make a name for himself or to defy his earthly father, who he's come to love because he knows he's trying to look out for him, and he hopes for a way to repay him.
Try to find some other way to deserve his love and make him proud.
He asks the Lord for grace and asks that he stays by his side the next day. James hears Rickey's prayer and grabs Rickey's baseball catcher glove and scribbles something in it. The next day, about hundreds participants gather for the tryout and are addressed by Red.
You're not just playing to win, you're playing to join the elite.
He introduces them to some coaches who are going to drill and test them until they can reduce their number to the absolute best among them. The coaches start to remove one man after the other based on their performance. When it's Rickey's turn, he hits extremely well, but he doesn't seem to be able to run, and he keeps stopping intermittently to rub his ankle. Eventually, the coach calls him aside and asks him to leave.
You can swing, you just can't run.
Rickey begs for a last chance and tells the coach he'll hit perfect moonshots on all the throws, but he'll leave if he can't.
I'll tell you what, if that's what it takes for you to leave, grab your bat.
In the next round, Rickey focuses and hits several perfect homers. As he hits the ball, they go over 400 feet away from where they are into the stadium where Red and an associate are in.
Someone tell me what the hell's going on?
Red finds it impossible that someone can hit balls that far to reach him. He's startled, but he soon tells his associate to stop whoever it is before he hurts someone.
We stop whoever's bombing us and check the boys back.
Rickey, who must have hit about 20 perfect homers at this point, starts to tear up when Red doesn't show up, and the coaches shortlist the rest of the men except him. He throws away his baseball bat and his glove and gets into his car. He drives carelessly to the spot where he used to hit stones as a kid. He recalls running into Gracie, and he gets back in his car. He returns to his field to pick up his glove, and he finds the scripture his dad had written inside it. The scripture is one from Samuel that says the Lord will honor those who honor him. Rickey decides to walk towards Red to give it one last shot. As he introduces himself,
Mr. Murff, I'm
Rickey Hill. Never forget a name.
He tells Red he's the best hitter they'll ever find, but he was disqualified because of a leg injury that will heal. Red asks him to wait till next year when his leg heals because a faulty leg can affect them and cost them a lot of money. When Rickey insists that he can't wait till next year, Red, who likes his boldness, decides to do him a favor by allowing him to play in the final games. He tells him he's going to let him DH for both teams and make the game pro-level standard so he can prove to him if he can hit and truly get to the big leagues. On the day of the final game, James sits by the table to prepare his sermon for the night. Helen, who prepares some eggs for James, brings them to him.
Down here in front of me, may I have my eggs?
James follows her outside and asks her what's gotten into her, so she starts to cry that she wishes her mother was here because she understood. Helen reminds him of when Rickey was born with frail legs, and the doctors said he'd never walk and never be good enough, but he ran and became a perfect child. She asks him how many miracles he needs to see before he sees what's right in front of him. So James just starts to stutter, so she walks out on him. At the stadium, Rickey runs into Gracie, who tells him he's gotten so good at cheating that she can't even catch him anymore. He tells her his secret is that he's not the one doing it. When she asks who's doing it, he kisses her, even though that doesn't answer the question. Meanwhile, during James's sermon, he explains to the people who came for the service why the church seems empty. He tells them that Rickey is having a game that can give him a chance of playing as a Major League Baseball player, but he tells them he's always been proud of the fact that he's never been to any of Rickey's games right up until this very night. At the game, Rickey steps out onto the stadium in front of thousands of onlookers. Even his youth baseball coach, Don, comes to cheer him.
Proud of you, Rickey.
Soon enough, a college four-time American player named Jake comes on the pitch.
Don't take it easy on him, Jake. He calls himself a hitter.
Rocks back and delivers a fastball. Right by Hill. Looked like he was on his front foot, probably anxious, just seeing that velocity for the first time.
He also barely hits the next ball, and the crowd becomes tense. At the third strike, Rickey hits the ball perfectly, and the crowd cheers him wildly. At the church, James confesses to the congregation that he now realizes that he's been selfish and cruel because he felt he understood what God's plan for his son was, when it was indeed just his plan all along.
I've been the one that's been the cripple.
He breaks down in tears and apologizes to them because he's supposed to be their spiritual leader, but he feels ignorant right now. Meanwhile, on the pitch, Red puts in a new pitcher.
Take him down. Let's end this.
As the pitcher throws, Rickey hits the ball right on, and Red has to move out of the way to avoid getting hit. Pitcher after pitcher comes in, and Rickey keeps hitting perfectly. At the fourth hit, Red watches the balls move and probably hasn't seen a game this good in a while. After some time passed, Rickey hit 10 balls out of 10 with 10 different pitchers. Suddenly, Red stops the game and brings out the big guns.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a treat right here. This is big league pitcher Jimmy Hammer.
All-star. Makes major leaguers look like Cinderella.
When Jimmy steps on the pitch, he has a mean look on him and plans to destroy Rickey. The first two hits go past Rickey, who almost can't see the ball pass him. At the third hit, it's a foul ball, so Jimmy throws again. The fourth throw hits Rickey in the ribs and he falls to the ground in excruciating pain. Red comes to him and tells him to go to base since he's already done 10 out of 10 hits and he doesn't have any other thing to prove. Rickey refuses and decides to play the last throw.
You do that again, you're done.
At this last throw, the whole stadium goes silent to see how things will go. Just at that moment, James arrives on the pitch and watches the game. As Jimmy throws, Rickey hits the ball way past the field, playing a homer.
Here it comes. Swung on. Hill smokes this ball to left center.
Might be, could be, it is. Hill's third moonshot tonight.
Swung on. Hill smokes this ball to left center.
The crowd goes wild and Rickey goes for a home run. As he runs past the field, he spots his father and slows down. Both men look at each other with tears in their eyes, and Rickey runs toward his teammates, who lift him. Meanwhile, Red, who has an oddly satisfying look on his face, walks away. After the game, James hugs Rickey and tells him he'd have to get used to this. On June 1st, 1975, Rickey signed with the Montreal Expos. He got married to Gracie on the home plate, and James officiated the ceremony. He played in the Expos farm system for 4 years. In 1979, his spine gave out, so he never played baseball again. Today, Rickey coaches Little League Baseball and is a golf instructor in Fort Worth, Texas.
Those that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall run and not be weary.